Thank you very much for inviting me and to give me such a splendid opportunity to share my experience of my PhD with you all. So, actually, in the morning, I started to think how I can present my own thesis. But I find I kind of forget what I am writing, but I hope I will remember while talking. But the title of my dissertation, PhD dissertation at University of London was The Art of Decolonization. This is actually my neologism. And the subtitle is On the Possibility of Socially Engaged Art in the Post-Colonial Context to East Asia. Anyway, you can interrupt whenever you have any question or comment very briefly. And the next slide, please. So this is actually, I didn't remember, but I invoked Sakai Naoki's remark on the kind of long-lasting legacy of colonialism in the present world as the epigraph of the very beginning of my PhD thesis. And we can replace the word imperialisms by colonialisms. I mean, there is a lot of theories on the difference between imperialism and colonialism, and the opinions are diverse. But my understanding is colonialism is part of imperialism, but a very integral part and kind of one of the biggest driving force of imperialism. So we can replace colonialism in this with imperialism in this context. So next slide, please. Yeah, so I will briefly explain before explaining the aim or objective or my research question of PhD thesis. I will briefly explain the post-colonial situation of East Asia. I think actually this this PhD thesis was written 3 years ago, but situation still remains same or even becoming worse, I think. And I will quote my own dissertation. In the very beginning, I said, over the past 10 years, there has been a noteworthy upsurge of nationalistic enthusiasm among East Asian states, albeit in varying forms and modalities. And also the 2000 indeed witnessed a spate of overt racist discourse in East Asia, especially in the territory of internet in the context of Japan, which emerged in tandem with simultaneous surge of extreme form of nationalism. Actually, the recurring controversial questions such as nationalism per se is harmful or not, or what is really nationalism is kind of beyond the scope of my dissertation, but at least in the context of Japan, there is a tendency that nationalistic passion becomes kind of exclusive violence, especially directed toward minorities, ethnic minorities in Japan. As an example, on the left side, there's a photo of the political demonstration organized by Zaitokkai, established 2006. Actually, this is a nationalist party, political party, formed 2006, and they frequently organized a kind of demonstration or campaigns that demand ethnic minority, especially Korean residents of Japan, leave to use their words to their own home. So could you go to the next one? Yeah, so of course there's a lot of studies, especially in the field of political science or international relations or even sociology. There's a lot of studies on how to deal with that kind of situation through their own methods. but there is very little studies addressing this issue from the perspective of art and culture. So my own thesis, the research question of my thesis is how can art or artistic practice deal with these kind of post-colonial issues in East Asia. So next slide, please. So I actually divide this research question into two aims. The first one is, as shown in this slide, to survey how artists and cultural producers in a broad sense, including filmmakers, novelists, poets from the post-war period to the present, have tackled various post-colonial issues. So this is a kind of art historical or cultural studies approach to examine this issue. And the second one, actually the second part consists of my own artistic practice. So the second purpose is to investigate the ability of socially engaged art to address the post-colonial issues in East Asia. So actually, I should have said in the very beginning, but this PhD, I have worked as a practicing visual artist as well. And this thesis is practice-based. So in the second part, I examine my own artistic projects and practices from as objective as possible ways, and think about the potential of artistic practice to intervene in this issue in an effective way. So the next slide, please.
Hiroki,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just had a question.
Yeah.
You're talking about post-colonial perspectives where Japan was a colonizer in that sense, right?
Yeah.
Not colonized, but a colonizer. So this would be like London or the British looking at post-colonial perspectives as a colonizer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, actually, this is very important point. I will talk about later, but the first chapter is a comparative study between British black art and the Zainichi Korean art. Zainichi Korean means Korean residents who can trace their ethnic roots to a colonial Korea under Japanese rule. So I try to compare these two territories of ethnic minorities art and think about to produce some interesting insight.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, I will little bit explain socially engaged art, the word socially engaged art. This is literally social practice in contemporary art, but the important thing is, of course, there is a lot of social practice before the war or even in the 1960s or whenever, but the important thing is since the early 1990s, there is a kind of this buzzword has come to the forefront of the discussion or debates or arguments on the contemporary art. So the important thing is a lot of scholars, especially in the field of art history and cultural studies, pay attention to the socially conscious art after the early 1990s. And I will self-quote, since the early 1990s, there has been a growing movement among contemporary artists across the world to choose to engage their art socially. These artists have expanded their artistic practices beyond the museums and galleries and moved into public spaces. So these projects are generally done outside the museum. And I think in the next slide, I picked one salient example of socially engaged art. Yeah. Actually, I didn't mention this work in my own thesis, but I think this is one of the very interesting example that is worth sharing. So Pedro Reyes is a Mexican artist, and he did a project titled this. I think this is Mexican Paras pistols. So shovels for sorry, pistols into shovels. I think in the English translation. And what he did is he actually was he is represented to the Liston Gallery. Liston Gallery is one of the most internationally well-known mega contemporary art gallery. And I will read out the explanation of this project. The artist worked with local authorities in Mexico to melt down guns into shovels intended to plant trees in cities elsewhere in the world. So he went to a city of Mexico where there's a fatal gun crime frequently happens. And he tried to collect as many guns as possible from local policies or local residents or whatever. And actually, he melted all of them into shovels, which is the next one. And actually, the important point is he made a cooperation with local residents. So collective activity is really important. So he actually planted some trees with using the shovel made from guns. So what I want to emphasize is one of the important aspects of artistic practice is it can use some kind of metonymical way. I mean, in this cases, the guns, which is a symbol of death, can be transformed into a plant, which symbolize a life or both in a very kind of poetic way. And also because practically the number of guns decreased, so this might be contribute to societal amelioration, I think. So that kind of artistic practice are generally called socially engaged art. So next slide, please. Yeah, so there's a keyword around surrounding social engaged art, but I will skip these. But there's what I want to say is, okay, I will explain briefly. So the first one is Nicolas Briot. He's a French curator. He wrote a book in 1998 titled Relational Aesthetics. And in this book, he asserted that the recent tendency of art is to not to create a work itself, but to create relationship itself. So, so some artists try to transform gallery into a like playground or something like that, and this is a kind of biggest source of socially engaged art becoming outstanding after 2000s. And for example, Grant Kester or Tom Finkelpaul, they are both, Grant Kester is an art critic and Tom Finkelpaul is, I think, museum director. And they emphasized the term collaboration or cooperation. So they said art can be a unique method to forge some collective knowledge or collective insight that the artists, the artist only the artist can produce or something like that. So they put very importance on the exchange among between artists and the participant, or even among the participants themselves. And also Claire Bishop, she is an art critic, and she actually criticized Nicolas Briot. I will quote my own thesis. Bishop said if relational art produces human relations, then the next logical question to ask is, what types of relations are being produced, for whom and why? So by saying this, she criticizes that the spaces regularly produced in typical relational art practices are quasi-public spaces in which human relationships are reduced to a mere component for art making, with little meaningful and productive exchange among those who take part. So this is a kind of friend gathering. So I think Claire Bishop's criticism is kind of relational aesthetics aspect of kind of friend funny gathering. So she said antagonism of relationship, so not consensus but dissensus, is very important in order to address societal issue. So do you have any questions so far? Can I go to next slide? Yeah, okay. So in the first chapter titled Struggle Over Visibility, and the second chapter comparative study, the subtitle is Comparative Study of Black British Art and Danish Korean Art. As I said in response to the question, actually in London there's a lot of post-colonial issue because, you know, Britain is one of the biggest, historically biggest empire, and there is a lot of colonial legacies still widespread in the UK. So I try to compare British black art made by black people. By black, I don't say the skin color, but so the concept is more wide implication. So Black British art can be defined as the art that address the legacy of imperialism left behind by British colonialism. And also Danish Korean art is the art made by Danish Korean artists. Danish Korean is, as I said, Korean residents whose ethnic roots can be traced back to colonial Korea under Japanese rule. So in this chapter, I applied the idea of minor transnationalism. I said this is a title of co-authored book by François Lyonnais and Xi Xiumei. She's a Taiwanese scholar, I think. And I will read out this sentence. The idea of minor transnationalism questions the prevailing presumption regarding center and periphery. Instead of identifying marginalized subjects solely in opposition to hegemonic discourses, therefore it aims to examine the relationship among the different margins. So this is kind of eye-opening for me. This method is kind of eye-opening to me because I always have a tendency to think about so-called minor culture in relation to the major or center, putative center. So in this chapter, I try to connect different margins in order to make a new insight. So next slide, please. British black art, the example of British black art is very, very wide term. So in this chapter, I focus on the artworks made in 1980s, because in 1980s, actually the term Black British art was produced, actually appeared in the 1980s, because prior to the emergence of the term, many artists said West Indian artists or No, so they didn't use the term British Black Art, but in order to unite themselves against the increasing hatred or discrimination in the UK at that time, they made a collective term of British Black Art. So this is a the left one is a video work made by Isaac Julian titled Territories. In this work, actually he used the documentary made by BBC, National Broadcasting in the UK. So what he did was he actually cut the documentary and mixed up them in a different way in order to show how mass media generates a kind of misrepresentation or stereotypic understanding. Actually, this is a documentary about the festival. What is the name? But some Caribbean festival conducted in London. So he tried to use media representation in a different way in order to get back the representation of themselves in their hands, in my interpretation. And the right one is a painting titled, this is a painting in a series titled Soko, so warehouse series made by a Zainichi Korean artist Cho Lyang-gyu. Actually, he in 1960, I think, he went to North Korea and disappeared. So no one knows even he lives or not, he is alive or not. So I think he made this painting in the mid 1950s, and I'm sorry, but this is kind of a part of the huge painting. But in this series of paintings, he tried to represent, or he tried to portray some kind of mental depression or mental some societal oppression that Zainichi Koreans in the post-war Japan actually felt in the methodology of painting. So I try to compare these two artistic works, not only these two, but also some artistic work, and made a conclusion like, could you, the next please? Yeah, so this is a kind of tentative conclusion, but in the chapter 1, I wrote this conclusion. So I will quote, whereas Black artists in the UK tended to tackle the issue of racism in relatively direct ways by creating works often enclosing explicit critiques that encouraged audiences to confront the lasting legacies of the long history of racial discrimination. So most of the artistic practice very aggressively criticize the discrimination or hatred. But on the other hand, Korean artists in Japan frequently delved deeper into the internal psychological terrain in order to figure out paths to come to terms with their conflicting identity, resulting in the foregrounding of the historiography of unjustifiable imperialism and colonialism, which engendered the problems surrounding their diasporic status. Even though the trajectories through which these artists dealt with a wide range of socio-political issues were varied, the two artistic movements shaped by ethnic minority individuals demonstrate possibilities for art to address the unresolved post-colonial agenda in the current world. And the next chapter, could you go to the next slide? So in the next chapter, I focus on the period after 1990s. So the second chapter aims to propose a new way to discuss Japanese social engaged art since the 1990s, analyzing how certain artists and collectives have tackled post-colonial issues in the country with singular and diverse methods. So I will briefly introduce some artworks I discussed in the thesis. So could you go to the next one? Yeah, this is very kind of complicated works. Just a moment. Okay, I found. Actually, this work is an etching piece, consists of the juxtaposition of three photographs of women in kappogi. Kappogi is the white apron for women to be worn to protect the kimono while doing housework in Japan. This succinctly illuminates the contrasting but related roles of Japanese women during the war. We see the startling, surprising picture of a woman with a pistol being taught how to shoot by male soldiers in between other pictures of a housewife cooking in the kitchen on the left, while members of National Diet Women's Association, Kokubo Fujinkai, are sending male soldiers off on the right. And Kokubo Fujinkai was a female organization set up in the 1930s to provide a wide variety of support for the military and its soldiers. As is epitomized in its well-known slogan, "National Defense starts from the kitchen," the organization aimed to prop up Japan's war of colonial aggression through domestic activity, through politicizing domesticity. And in adoption with kappogi, a symbol of idealized femininity in Japan, encapsulated in the paternalistic thought of good wife, wife mother, Ryosai Kenbo ideology, as a uniform obviously shows that the association laid particular importance on housemaking activities. And when considering this politics of kitchen, we can find out a common thread running through all the three photographs that Shimada used. Shimada's photographic collage disclosed the Japanese women's actual participation or willing participation in the war, astutely displaying a maternal aspect of Japanese imperialism. So it was widely accepted that Japanese women is kind of victim as well as other victims in the neighboring countries of kind of paternalistic gunbu, military men, military Japanese men. But she tried to reveal the willing participation or willing cooperation to the war by Japanese women through this kind of juxtaposition. And next one, please. And also Okinawa is really important because after, yeah, of course, as I said, Japan was a former colonizer, but after the war, Japan was kind of semi-occupied by the US. So it was under the subjugated under Japan U.S. occupation for 7 years, and after that Okinawa was separated to Japan, and they had still remained U.S. territory for a long time, and until 1972 or something like that. So there is a lot of Cold War legacies in Okinawa, and the U.S. military facilities. It's one of the salient example. And Chikako Yamashiro is a video artist, and she portrays the dual figures unilaterally projected by the mainland onto Okinawa in this video work titled "I Like Okinawa Sweets." Actually, what she did is she continued to devour Okinawa's famous ice cream in front of the fence of a US military bases. And this simple act of attentively keeping on eating a symbolic ice cream of Okinawa, Yamashiro astutely draws a portrait of Okinawa exploited by the mainland Japan and the US, simultaneously alluding to the dark shadow of tourism prevalent in this island. So she tried to highlight or foreground the US-Japan military conspiracy, which is continued after the World War II. And sorry, the last one. So maybe I will finish this one. It's the last example, and this is a video work, and the location is Yasukuni Shrine, where the very problematic Shinto shrine, where a lot of war criminals are enshrined. So this is always controversy when for example, Prime Minister went to this shrine. And Meiro Koizumi made a video work by kind of asking actor go into some kind of parade campaign by a nationalist to, in my interpretation, to portray a kind of nationalistic atmosphere encircling this problematic shrine. So actually, I have to finish because already 6:48. So, but after that, I try to analyze my own artistic practice.
You can sum it up, Hiroki. There's no problem. You can go on for another.
Okay, sorry.
Because it would be nice to know what your practice and how it culminated.
Okay, thank you so much. So the next one, what is the next slide? Actually, I jumped into the conclusion, but in the conclusion part, I said I can identify two possibilities of social engaged art in order to address the post-colonial issue. One is challenging colonial imagination, and the second is to facilitate a deeper understanding of post-colonial East Asia. And I will quote, the first one is, first, I have identified that art can impact on colonial imagination. So I think I quoted the thought of Ashish Nandi, I think Indian scholar. He said there is a second form of colonization, which is mental colonization, still affecting the people's mind even after the war, after the colonization. So by using visual or sensory elements, art can impact on the mental aspect of people, including some epistemological discrimination or cognitive stereotypic mind or something like that. And I said second possibility is a little bit more practical, because East Asia doesn't have a common language. Of course, we can recognize kanji. Almost all of East Asian people can understand kanji, but because there's no common language, art can facilitate kind of interesting collaboration in order to make some kind of collective understanding, or to enable people to collectively think about the contested post-colonial issues. Actually, I did some workshops as a part of my artistic practice, and I actually feel that it is an effective method to think about among East Asian people or about the post-colonial issue. And the last slide is, I think, to go to last slide. Yeah. Sorry. Actually, as a result, I think reconceptualization of social engaged art can be possible because, you know, contemporary art arguments are very West-centric. Most of the discussion on contemporary art is very West-centric. So by looking at some activist artworks in East Asia, I think I can reconceptualize, or at least challenging or destabilize the notion of social engaged art that have been named or neatly theorized in the West. This is a kind of conclusion of my thesis. Sorry, I couldn't introduce my own artistic practice.